Hello YouTube, here we are again with another big box for the lab. This goes along with the other unboxing I did. Two pieces of equipment for working on, old tube equipment, and even in this case, sometimes not tube equipment, but some nice safety equipment in this case. So let's take a look at what we got. Okay, another really big box to deal with. So let me get the cord out of the way. See if I can get this out. I have to take it away for a minute. I'm sorry about that. Big boxes. Looks like it's packed up pretty decent. Lots of foam. And keep the bag away from babies because it's a suffocation risk. Apparently we're not smart enough to know that anymore. And that plastic is caught. Yeah, it's ripped up through the holes. Well, you know what? We'll get it off and make it where it's not a risk to babies. How's that? Just put that thing up like this. Okay. Now, number one, easy to get off. Number two, don't have to worry about babies. So what do we got here? Well, what we've got is a isolation transformer, 1000 VA. So purpose of an isolation transformer, if you do not know, I know many of you probably do, is to give you galvanic isolation from the AC power line. So you plug it in, and what you got a circuit breaker up here, you got a display here, we'll get back to in a minute. So when you plug it in, you get two outlets of 120 volts that are isolated from this input by a transformer. So what that does for you is you no longer have connections to ground or neutral. This one has a special, they call it the mode switch back there. As you notice, there's a mode switch, standard and special. Standard isolates you from the ground. Special isolates you from the neutral ground is the way I understand it. But the reason you want this is when you're working on high voltage equipment, especially if you got tubes in there that might be running 1200 volts or whatever, you don't want your chassis ground connected up. You don't want a path directly connected to the neutral and ground of your power source. Because if you're touching the chassis and you touch something that's hot, you've got a direct path for the current and you have a shock risk. Now, this doesn't prevent you from getting shocked. What it does, it prevents you from single point shocks. You're probing in there and you get on something really hot and you somehow or other manage to touch something that's really hot. You need a path back through the circuit. Current can't flow without a completed circuit. We know that. That's basic electronics, right? But now if you touch something that's got 1200 volts on it and you're not touching anything else, you don't have to worry about accidentally touching the chassis or you touching something in the shop that has a ground to give a path for power, because the power that you're getting into, if you're feeding it from this device, no longer goes back to that circuit. It goes only through the hot and the neutral in here. So you have to get across the hot and neutral both in your device before you have to worry about being electrocuted. You still can electrocute yourself working on this stuff. It's just an additional layer. And it's a good layer. It really cuts your risk down. So because of that, I wanted this because I'm going to be working on tube equipment and higher voltages, and I'm probably going to hook it up to where it feeds the strip on the bench, because the other thing these are used for that's very, very nice is when you're using your scopes and your spectrum analyzers and all of your electronic equipment, your scope has a ground. The outside of your probe is a ground. If we look right here on my scope and you look at outside of this BNC connector right here, that's ground. That runs through and gets onto the ground of the house. So the lab's ground goes back to the power panel, and you're connected to ground. So if you get on something that's high voltage, you've got a path to ground right here. You can blow your scope up easily. If you're running your scope on this, this is no longer a path directly to ground, so it helps you prevent blowing your scopes and stuff up. So that's, which by the way, that does happen in labs. So that's what this is about. They're heavy, they're not cheap, and the bigger you get, the more expensive and the heavier they get. This one wasn't too bad. It's a fairly large one, 1,000 VA. So I thought that was big enough for me. So what I'm going to do is let's hook up the power cord and let's just show what it does, what the screen does for us, okay? So I'll be right back. We're back, and here's what I've done. I plugged this in. I've connected my tweezer soldering iron to it. We're going to turn it on. We can see that we got 123.1 volts, looks like to me, at 0.06 amps, 6.49 watts, 59.9 hertz, 1.04 power factor. So it thinks we got a little bit of draw here, even with this off, and it may have, for all I know. Let's kick around and see what happens. Okay, iron's coming live and heating up. I'm now pulling 1.3 amps, 121.2 volts, 136 watts, 59.9 hertz, 1.03 power factor. We haven't used enough power to use any kilowatt hours yet. So that's what the screen does for you. You've got a little reset button here, will reset the kilowatt hours. So this is what it does. This is now working isolated. It's not connected back to my ground and neutral. So that's all this does. There's really no fancy anything to it. But what this will do is if I have this plugged in and I run my auto transformer to the device, I can bring up old systems slow. And that way I don't have to risk throwing 120 volts on. And I can monitor my current flow right here. Sort of like what you do with a dim bulb, where you watch the dim bulb and use it as a current limiter, and you watch to see how it's glowing, how much current's running through it. You can see how much current as you bring the voltage up is happening here, whether it seems to be within reason. So that's kind of what I'm going to be using this for. And you're going to see this used in some future videos that are coming up pretty quickly. So, hey, thanks for tuning in. I hope you learned a little something. I hope it was entertaining. We'll see. These aren't the most expensive I could find by any means, but they seem to have pretty good reviews. So we'll find out in the future just how well they hold up and how well they do for us. Thanks for tuning in. See you in the next video.